Welcome to the Supervisory Pressure Cooker. Today, we're spending a day in the life of our favorite chaotic trio at the firm. We've got Priya the principal, who's just trying to keep the firm compliant. We've got Riley the representative, who's desperately trying to keep his clients happy. And then we have their absolute most hyperactive client, Carla the customer. Carla loves leverage, she loves trading, and today she is going to test literally every single margin boundary in the book.
But real quick, before Carla totally blows up her account, this explainer is brought to you by CertFuel. They've got a complete Series 24 course with adaptive study quizzes, smart flashcards, and unlimited practice exams that are weighted exactly like the real thing. It's an incredible tool to get your principal registration across the finish line. So definitely check them out at certfuel.com.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Carla just opened a brand new margin account with Riley. But as Priya the principal knows, supervising this account isn't just about following one single set of rules. We have to answer a massive supervisory question right out of the gate. Who actually controls the rules of Carla's margin account? Because to understand this, we've got to look at two completely different regulatory layers.
Section 1. Welcome to the Margin Club. I want you to imagine margin regulation as an exclusive and, frankly, highly stressful nightclub. You don't just walk right into the club and do whatever you want, right? There's someone at the door dictating how you get in, and there's a totally different person on the dance floor making sure you don't completely lose your balance once you're inside.
So let's look at this side by side. The Federal Reserve Board, or FRB, handles the door. Their policy dictates the initial margin on equity purchases. Think of this initial margin requirement as the bouncer. Carla wants to buy $100,000 of stock. Well, the bouncer says, pay the 50% cover charge at the door. Carla puts up 50 grand, and boom, she's in. But once that trade settles, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, takes over. FINRA is the floor manager. FINRA governs maintenance margin. From day 2 onward, FINRA is watching Carla's equity every single day to ensure she maintains a minimum balance. So we have two authorities doing two completely different jobs operating at the exact same time.
Section 2. The maintenance floor drops. So let's see how this actually builds. Carla is in the club, she bought her stock. But sadly, the market just completely tanked. Her stock's value is dropping fast. Riley the representative is sweating, and Priya the principal is watching that FINRA maintenance floor with a hawk's eye. Because if Carla hits that floor, Priya has no choice but to issue a maintenance call.
Burn this number into your brain right now. 25%. This is the FINRA maintenance margin floor for long equity positions. If Carla is holding margin security she purchased, her equity absolutely must stay at or above 25% of the current market value. If she drops below this, Priya has to demand a deposit of cash or marginable securities, period.
But what if Carla was shorting the stock? That changes the entire game. For short equity positions, the maintenance margin floor jumps to 30% of the current market value. Now, why the sudden jump? Well, think about it. When you buy a stock, it can only go to zero. But when you short a stock, your losses are theoretically unbounded. That price can go up to infinity. Regulators obviously want a much thicker cushion for that kind of infinite risk.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive exam trap. The 25% and 30% FINRA rules we just talked about are absolute minimum floors, but they are absolutely not ceilings. Let's say Carla puts 60% of her entire account into one highly volatile tech stock. Priya, the principal, looks at that concentrated position and goes, nope, way too risky. Priya's firm can set a higher house requirement of, say, 35% for concentrated or low-priced stocks. Firms can always demand more protection than FINRA requires. They just can never, ever demand less.
Section 3. Carla becomes a PDT. So let's talk about pattern day traders. Carla gets bored of just holding stocks, so she starts rapidly buying and selling the exact same security in the exact same day. She's trying to catch these tiny intraday price swings. Riley, the representative, sees this volume spiking on his surveillance dashboard and immediately flags Priya, because Carla is about to trigger a brand new regulatory regime.
The magic number here is 4. When you execute 4 or more day trades, and by that, I mean you buy and sell the same security on the same trading day, you cross the critical threshold. This flags the customer as a pattern day trader, or PDT.
Let's break down the exact math Riley, the representative, must use to officially lock in this classification. Carla is a pattern day trader if she executes 4 or more day trades within a rolling 5 business day period, and those day trades constitute more than 6% of her total trades in the margin account during that exact same time frame. Once Riley checks both of those specific boxes, Carla officially gets the PDT label. As a pattern day trader, the velvet ropes of our margin nightclub get so much tighter. Carla must have a minimum equity of $25,000 at the start of any trading day where she plans to execute a day trade. If she has it, great. She gets massive day trading buying power, up to 4 times her maintenance margin excess. But what if she doesn't?
Okay, I want you to pause the explainer right now. Really think like a supervisor here. Carla's account took a major hit yesterday. Her equity is now sitting at just $20,000. She calls Riley in a panic and says, "Look, don't worry, let me just execute a few quick day trades this morning to make that $5,000 back." Does Priya, the principal, approve this? Can Carla day trade her way out of a deficit? Think about it for a second.
The answer is absolutely no. Do not fall for this trick on the exam. The $25,000 minimum is a strict precondition. It is not a goal you can just trade your way toward. If your equity is below $25,000, day trading is explicitly not permitted until the equity is completely restored through deposited cash or securities. You simply cannot dig your way out of a hole by digging faster.
Moving to Section 4, Margin Calls and Restrictions. Carla, being Carla, obviously didn't listen. She failed the requirement, generating a deficit in her day trading buying power. So, Priya the principal's supervisory escalation workflow officially kicks off. Priya must issue a day trading margin call. So how much time does Carla have to fix this massive mess? She has exactly 5 business days to meet this day trading margin call. That is a hard, non-negotiable deadline.
Now pay close attention to the exact supervisory escalation path Priya has to follow here. Step 1, Priya issues the call. Step 2, the firm waits exactly 5 business days. Step 3, if Carla has completely ignored Riley's desperate voicemails and fails to meet the call, Priya triggers the mandatory restriction.
And the consequence for this is steep. 90 days. Carla's account faces a 90-day restriction for failing to meet that day trading margin call. But we need to be really clear about what the word restricted actually means here.
Because here is your next big exam trap. The account is not frozen permanently, and her existing positions are not suddenly locked in ice. A 90-day restriction means the account is restricted to a cash-available basis. Carla can still buy securities, but she has to do it using settled cash that is already sitting in the account. No more margin leverage. Also, remember, if she suddenly wins the lottery on day 40 and finally pays that margin call, the 90-day clock immediately resets, and the restriction lifts.
Just a quick but important note from the regulators. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, recently approved amendments to transition away from this legacy start-of-day PDT structure, moving toward a real-time intraday margin framework. This basically forces firms to compute margin based on real-time risk during the day. However, since this is a staged transition, you absolutely still need to know those legacy PDT numbers for the exam. And to be clear, the SEC transition does not eliminate those 25% and 30% maintenance floors we talked about earlier.
Finally, we reach Section 5. Upgrading to portfolio margin. Carla is exhausted. She is sick and tired of standard margin calls and tells Riley, "Look, I'm running complex, hedge strategies with long stock and index puts. There has to be a more efficient way to calculate my margin than treating every single position in isolation." Riley smiles. There is. It's called portfolio margin.
Let's look at this side-by-side comparison to see why it matters. Standard margin uses flat percentages. It treats every position in total isolation. It doesn't care if a long stock is perfectly hedged by a put option. It still demands that flat 25% maintenance. Portfolio margin, on the other hand, treats the entire account as one giant interconnected risk unit. It calculates the margin requirement based on the theoretical loss of the portfolio under stressed scenarios. Because Carla's puts offset her long stock risk, her theoretical loss is much smaller, which can result in a significantly lower margin requirement.
But, and this is a crucial point, Priya the principal can't just hand this out to everyone. Exam trap, portfolio margin is not the default. It is an elected alternative. It's only available to eligible, sophisticated customers, typically requiring at least $100,000 in equity. Priya must explicitly review and approve this upgrade based on strict suitability guidelines.
Which leaves us with this provocative thought as we close out Carla's absolutely chaotic trading day. Does a hedged portfolio always guarantee a lower margin requirement, or does it just offer a more accurate reflection of real risk? Because the second you strip away those hedges, portfolio margin stress tests will expose the danger immediately. Keep that in mind as you study the underlying mechanics of risk. Go get back into your Cert Fuel practice exams, review the firm's escalation workflows, and I'll see you in the next explainer.